And that year, if I look at my 16-year-old self, what you would have seen was a person who was most likely described as the teacher's pet. I always followed the rules. I was the peacemaker in our family. I never wanted to disappoint anyone. On the outside, I was an athlete and a top student, had lots of acquaintances and a small core group of friends. But on the inside, I was scared of almost everything. And my measuring stick for life was, I wonder what people will think about it. I wonder what they will think about me. And in 1990, that was also the year that I recognized my brother not as just a pain in my ass, but an actual human being. See, Dane was 14. There was only 16 months that separated us. And for most of our lives together, I was the peacemaker. I was the tattletale. I was the babysitter. I was the one that tried to protect him from himself. Because Dane lived life by two rules. Am I going to try something new, whether I fail or not? And are we going to have a little fun? So in 1990, as I was coming into this new recognition about my brother actually being a human being, we started having conversations. It's amazing what you can learn from people when you actually take the time to talk to them. And sometimes these conversations would last way into the evening and late into the night. And he was asking me questions about, gosh, you're a junior in high school this year. What are you going to do after high school? What do you think? I've been involved with the juvenile court system. Do you think anybody will ever hire me? And for the first time, he shared with me something very deep and personal, that at church camp that summer, he'd actually given his life to Christ and had created this new core group of friends that he was writing letters to on and off since church camp. And I remember thinking after one of those late night conversations, oh, thank God, he is finally taking life seriously. It's time that he start to focus and settle down and understand the impact and the consequences that come with his decisions. At the end of that summer, we had this family ritual. Dane and my stepdad always went to Boy Scout camp at Camp Birch in Greene County, and we always went to family night. And it was at family night that Dane actually introduced me to his camp counselor, Doug. And after a couple of conversations that evening and a couple of phone calls later in the next couple of weeks, Doug and I started dating. Doug was a freshman in college. It's pretty cool being a junior in high school, dating a freshman in college. He was working part-time and going to school part-time. And we had a couple of dates early in that fall, but they were mostly just him and I, and we weren't really intermingling with our friend groups. And so on October 5th, it was a Friday, I came home from school and found Doug parked in my driveway. I wonder what's up with this. Now that day I remember, it was a clear blue sky. It was the quintessential Friday night football kind of day. You know, the day where it's still in the 70s during the day, but you can feel that hint of chill in the air. And you know that it's going to be sweatshirt weather by the time that the sun goes down, and you're all ready to get into the fall season. And I love fall, and I love football. And so he came to meet me after school. It was a surprise. We hadn't planned to meet up because I was just coming home quickly to change clothes to get back to school to go travel with the football team to the football game. And so he said, you know, I got to thinking, some of our friends are going to have a bonfire tonight. How about we go to the bonfire after the football game? And I thought to myself, yes, we're finally going to do something with our group of friends. And he said, and the more I thought about it, like if you wanted to go to the bonfire, I could run home and get my varsity jacket for you to wear. Now, I don't know about any of you, but in the 1990s, as a 16-year-old girl, there were two status symbols that told the entire world that you were officially dating. One was a class ring, and the other was a varsity jacket. So holy hell, we'll get that jacket. Yes, we're not only doing things with friends, but I'm going to be wearing that jacket. And so I was giving him a kiss goodbye when my brother rolled up from middle school, and because he was actually the one that introduced us, it was very natural for Doug to say to Dane, why don't you just come with me? We'll meet up with everybody at the football game. And Dane looked at me as if to ask for permission, And I nodded my head, yeah, I'll let Mom know. You go ahead and go. They hopped in the car and they drove off. I went and got ready for the football game and met up with the team. Well, most of the thoughts that were consuming my mind was, I wonder what I'll look like in that jacket. What are my friends going to say when we show up to the bonfire? And through the first quarter, I kept looking at the stands, kind of waiting to see when he would arrive. I actually noticed when my mom and stepdad got to the game. And by the second quarter, kind of was looking up at the stands more frequently. In fact, at one point, my mom kind of did the shrugged shoulder symbol, like, I don't know where they're at. And by halftime, I was starting to get a little nervous. It was not like them not to show up. But again, this was 1990, before we had cell phones, and there would have been really no way for them to contact any of us to tell us about any kind of delay. But what is at every high school football game, there are EMTs and there are sheriffs that usually stand around just to watch the game because they got nothing better to do. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to go see if they might have some information. And I recognized the sheriff. He had been at several games before. And so I went up to him and I said, hey, you know, my brother and my boyfriend were supposed to meet us at the game. And they haven't gotten here yet. I was wondering if maybe you've got any information. And he said, well, what are their names? And I said, well, my brother's name is Dane Marshall. And that didn't seem to register. And I said, well, my boyfriend's name is Doug McMillan. And the moment that I said his name, the blood drained from his face and his eyes started to tear up. And he cleared his throat and he said, is your mom here? Now immediately I got that gut punch, that feeling in the deep core that something has happened. But I am always the optimist. While I worried about what my friends thought about it, I always could paint a pretty picture. And so I went to the sidelines and I got my mom and I said, hey, these guys want to talk to us, something about the guys. And so she came down. And remember, my brother was a juvenile delinquent, so immediately my mother's attention went to, I wonder what he's done now. Because that's the only reason a sheriff ever wanted to talk to my mom about my brother. But as we walked across the field and got to the parking lot, the sheriff had moved to the back part of the ambulance and asked us to sit inside. And that's the last thing I remember. My very next memory is of the next morning, opening my eyes, aware that I'm on a couch, and as I look around, I'm in the living room of my best friend's house. I'm still in the clothes that I had on the night before. My shoes are still on. I have no recollection of how I got there. And I remember taking a deep breath and thinking, oh, thank God, it was just a terrible dream. But before I could exhale, it all came rushing back, that both Dane and Doug had died in a car accident. And so the next few days are just a jumble, mostly of noise. Lots and lots of activity and lots of noise. And there were people around all the time. Casseroles as far as the eyes can see. And while I don't really remember the events of that week, what I know, based on the stories that have been told over and over by friends, and the scrapbooks of articles and memorial programs, is that we did 3 memorial services and 2 funerals in the next 5 days. I was told that I gave my brother's eulogy, but I don't remember standing up in front of the hundreds of people that showed up for his service. I remember James Taylor coming on the radio as we left Doug's graveside service. It was in the pouring rain, and I remember laying my head down on my friend's lap and just crying. But for some reason, I can remember that song playing on the radio. I can remember friends that stopped by just to check and see how I was doing. And several days after all of the activity, I remember the quiet. A quiet that I had never heard in my house before. See, I grew up in a German household, so we always had at least 1 radio and 2 TVs and 7 people all talking at the same time. And anywhere my brother went, there was either extreme laughter or lots of yelling and screaming. Because my brother always brought noise with him, and he never sat still, so there was always activity. And I remember thinking to myself, is this my new normal? This quiet? And somewhere along the line in that timeline of the next few weeks, my pastor showed up As a social worker now, I knew that this was most likely a suicide check. We had several weeks since this tragedy had happened. I had not really gotten back into school. I stopped doing homework. I wasn't taking phone calls. When I did show up in groups, I would find some reason to get out of it immediately. And so the pastor came to talk to me. And I don't really remember what we talked about. I do remember I just need to answer the questions the way he wants me to answer them so that he will go and leave me alone. So if I can just get through this, I can get to be by myself again. But one question stuck with me. And through that question was, well, who will you be now? Who will I be now? I thought, and I remember thinking, I don't know who the hell I was before. I was the person that did what everybody wanted them to do. I was the person that didn't disappoint it, that tried to keep the peace, that only did and took risks if I knew I was 150% going to be successful. And that question stuck with me for several more weeks. And so while I would do anything today to have my little brother back, I am so grateful for the gift that he gave me through this tragedy. See, Dane radiated joy. His bright blue eyes and his platinum hair and that crooked smile. Even when the sheriffs asked him if he was the one that popped the hood ornaments off of 22 cars, he said, yeah, it was me, but man, we had fun. And he lived 80 years of life in 14 years. I still don't believe I've had as many experiences at 45 as he did at 14. And something happened through that process where he became my new measuring stick. And I started, instead of asking, what will people think, what would Dane think? And will I learn something new? And will we have a little bit of